My name is Eleanor Westcott, and I used to believe that motherhood was a permanent kind of love. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. I always thought when the time came for my children to need me again, I would welcome them with open arms. That's what a mother does right. You give, and then you give again. But no one tells you what happens when the giving becomes a slow, silent theft. It started 3 years ago when my son Ethan and his wife Rachel lost their apartment. Or so they said. Just for a little while, Mom Ethan told me over the phone, his voice softened by guilt and just enough desperation. We just need to get back on our feet. I said yes, of course. I had a 4-bedroom house too large for me since my husband passed away, and I'd always missed the echo of family inside it. The idea of having Ethan here again made my heart flutter like it hadn't in years. I didn't realize I was inviting ghosts that would never leave. They arrived with boxes and bags and promises of gratitude. Rachel kissed me on the cheek and called me Mom, but it felt rehearsed. Their son Jonah, then 5 years old, clung to her leg and didn't meet my eyes. I told myself they just needed time to adjust. By the second week, they'd rearranged my pantry. I just alphabetized the spices, Rachel said, waving a dismissive hand. You had like 3 bottles of paprika. I let it slide. It's a small thing, I told myself. Nothing worth mentioning. The third week, Ethan brought home a new television and mounted it in the living room, without asking. The old one, which had belonged to my husband, was put in the garage. We figured you'd like a smart TV, Rachel said, pouring herself wine from my cabinet. You can talk to this one. But no one seemed to be listening to me. Little things. Always little things piling up like dead leaves. A new shower curtain in the guest bathroom, now their bathroom. A louder laugh from Rachel when I suggested I'd make meatloaf for dinner. Maybe something lighter, Mom. We're trying to eat clean. By the second month, my home had a strange smell. Not unpleasant, just not mine. Coconut shampoo. That expensive citrus detergent Rachel used. The scent of wet sneakers in the hallway from Jonah's daycare cubby. My lavender diffuser was moved into the guest room, then accidentally knocked over. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and found Rachel sitting at my table, laptop open, headphones in, speaking sharply to someone on Zoom. She didn't notice me. This house is cute, but ancient. You should see the curtains, she said, laughing. Honestly, it's like living in a time capsule. She was talking to a friend, about my house, about me. I stood there quietly, holding the coffee pot, feeling my stomach turn. She looked up, startled, and closed the laptop. Oh, just talking to Danielle, she said quickly. You know her, right? I didn't. I wanted to say something, to ask what she meant. But instead I smiled and nodded and said, Good morning. I made my coffee the same way I'd done for 30 years, but it no longer tasted right. 3 months in, Ethan still hadn't found work. Rachel took on freelance brand consulting, which seemed to involve long hours in my dining room and lots of complaints about the Wi-Fi. Can you reset the router again? She'd ask loudly, like I were the help. They paid no rent, no groceries. And when I brought up finances one evening, Ethan frowned like I'd insulted him. We're family, he said. Yes, I said. Family helps each other. He didn't hear the difference. By the 6th month, my friends had stopped visiting. They said things like, You must be so busy now, and I don't want to intrude. I didn't tell them I was the one who felt intruded upon. I didn't know how to say it without sounding ungrateful or worse, crazy. At night, I stayed up in bed staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the creaks in the hallway, hearing Rachel's voice laughing through the vents, watching shadows from the smart TV flicker under my door. I was a visitor in my own home. Sometimes I thought I saw my husband in the hallway mirror, or I'd reach for the phone to call him and stop midway. I missed his arms, his logic, his way of cutting through nonsense with a single raised eyebrow. But he was gone. And now I was alone, surrounded by people. Jonah once walked past me and said, "Daddy says you forget a lot of stuff." I stopped in my tracks. "What?" He shrugged and skipped down the hallway. I hadn't forgotten anything. Not once. But a new seed had been planted, and seeds, I would soon learn, grow fast when watered with silence. I thought back to when Ethan was young. He used to come home with bruised knees and wild stories about dragons. I would draw him warm baths and make cocoa with extra marshmallows. He used to beg me never to die. And now he rolled his eyes if I asked how his job search was going. He kissed Rachel when I asked if they were looking for a new apartment. And he left the room when I started to cry. It wasn't just about space, or finances, or inconvenience. It was about something deeper, something no mother wants to name. I was being devoured piece by piece, gesture by gesture, smile by fake smile. Not by enemies, but by those I had once fed with my own hands. And the worst part, I still made them dinner every night. My name was once said with warmth. Now it's said with impatience. Or worse, never at all. Where's the almond milk, Eleanor, not Mom? Not even Mama like Ethan used to call me when he wanted something as a boy. Now it's just my name clipped like I'm the housekeeper they forgot to fire. It's astonishing how quickly roles dissolve. One moment you're a mother, the next you're background noise. I began noticing it one morning as I stood in the kitchen watching Rachel pour cereal into Jonah's bowl, without looking at me, without acknowledging that I'd already laid out breakfast. She just swept my plate aside like it was clutter. The cereal box she used wasn't even one I'd bought. Slowly, the groceries became more and more foreign. Kale chips instead of crackers. Almond milk instead of whole. Organic berries priced like jewelry. I tried to offer Jonah some toast. Rachel gently pulled the plate back. "No, thank you. We're cutting carbs for him." She said it with a smile, as though I'd offered the child poison. That same week, I found one of my favorite cookbooks in the giveaway pile next to the back door. The note on it said, "Too heavy." I picked it up and placed it back on the kitchen shelf. The next day, it was gone again. It didn't end with food. It didn't stop at my books. It was my music next. I always played Chopin on Sunday mornings. It was a small tradition I kept from the days when my husband would hum along while reading the paper. Rachel began turning the volume down whenever she walked past the speaker. "It's a bit much for Jonah," she explained. So I wore headphones. But even that felt like a retreat. One morning, I walked into the living room and noticed that the large portrait of my late husband and me had been moved. Not taken down, just quietly relocated to the far hallway near the laundry room. Rachel had replaced it with a minimalist print of a forest. I stood there, hand on the wall, fingertips on the frame's empty nail. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed, trying to steady my breath. I wasn't losing my mind, I knew that. I had always been detail-oriented. That's why I'd been a good professor for over 30 years. I could track themes across 3 Tolstoy novels in my sleep. And yet, in my own house, things were shifting beneath me, as if the floorboards were being replaced one by one while I stood on them. What unsettled me the most was that Ethan didn't seem to notice or care. He didn't defend me. He didn't thank me. He simply acted like this was normal, like this was owed. Once, when I gently reminded him that they had agreed to stay only 6 months, he looked up from his phone and said, "Why are you keeping count?" As if I were the one being petty. That night, I sat at the dining table long after they'd all gone to bed. The lights were off. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint snore of the dog in the next room, and I said my own name aloud. Eleanor. Just to hear it. Just to remind myself that I still existed outside of their expectations. I thought about my identity, how it had become so completely tied to their presence. How I was now a support beam for a family that didn't want to see the cracks forming in me. They needed me functional but silent. Useful but unseen. One afternoon, Rachel stood in the hallway with a folded pile of my laundry. "You left this in the dryer," she said. I hadn't. I always folded my things immediately. I was meticulous. But I thanked her anyway. She smiled. "No worries. I know it's hard to keep track sometimes." It was subtle, the way she said it. The implication in the tone. Hard to keep track. It echoed all day in my ears. When Ethan got home, I asked him if he remembered where I'd left my house keys. I knew exactly where they were on the hook by the kitchen door, but I asked him anyway. He furrowed his brow. "You've been forgetting things a lot lately." There it was again. A narrative was forming. Slowly. Like fog settling over glass. Hard to see at first until everything is blurred. The next day, I went to the pharmacy and bought a journal. A small plain one. I wrote the date, the time, everything I'd done that day, from what I'd eaten to where I'd left my wallet. I tucked it in my nightstand drawer. I didn't tell anyone. It became my anchor. I started logging small conversations, making note of what had been said, what hadn't. Not because I was paranoid, but because I wasn't going to let myself be erased. You can't fight a ghost story unless you document that you're alive. That week, Rachel made a comment to Jonah while I was nearby. She said it softly, knowing I'd hear. "Sometimes Grandma gets confused, baby. Just smile and nod." Jonah looked up at her with his wide, trusting eyes. I looked down at my hands and clenched them under the table. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled and nodded. At night, I replayed the moment in my head. Her voice. Her smirk. The calculated angle of her back as she whispered poison into my grandson's ear. And that was the first time I whispered a word I never thought I'd say about my own son's wife. Parasite. She wasn't just occupying space, she was feeding on it. Replacing memories with doubt. Replacing routines with her rules. Replacing love with quiet humiliation. And Ethan. He was letting her. He had grown so far from the boy I raised that I no longer recognized the shape of his heart. But I knew one thing: parasites don't stop on their own. They keep feeding. Until the host wakes up. It was a Tuesday when I realized Rachel had become the queen of the house, not in name, in posture, in behavior, in the way she moved through the kitchen with ownership, the way her voice echoed louder than mine even when she wasn't yelling. She didn't need to scream, she simply existed as if the house belonged to her. And everyone else adapted. I opened the hallway closet that morning to get my coat and nearly fell backward. My winter jackets had been pushed to the back. In their place were rows of neatly folded clothes, hers. Boxes labeled Rachel, holiday decor, and Jonah. Art supplies lined the top shelf. A shoebox of mine was on the floor, lid askew, half crushed beneath her ankle boots. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the scent of citrus and lavender sachets that weren't mine. I closed the door and pressed my fingers into my palms until the sting distracted me. They weren't even pretending anymore. That afternoon, Rachel invited one of her friends over. A woman with a glossy blowout and gym-toned arms who called me Elle, like we were college roommates. She said, "You used to be a professor." The woman beamed. That must have been so cute. Cute. Not noble, not admirable. Cute like a puppy that does tricks. I smiled politely and brought out a tray of tea, because that's what was expected. Hostess duties, even if I hadn't invited anyone. Even if no one noticed that I hadn't spoken more than 3 words. As I turned to leave the room, Rachel called out, "Can you close the door behind you, Eleanor? We're doing a vision board session with wine." I paused in the hallway. For a moment I thought I had imagined it. But I hadn't. She wanted privacy in my own living room. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the upstairs window staring at the porch light flickering with a bulb no one had replaced. My husband used to fix those things the moment they blinked. Now it just blinked and blinked, like a dying pulse, ignored. I made a list on a napkin, closet rearranged. Living room art replaced. No dinner invitation. Ignored in conversations. Called cute. Asked to leave own room. At the top, I wrote one word in all caps, invisible. The next morning, I tried to take back a sliver of ground. I woke up early before anyone else and made pancakes the way Jonah loved them, thick, golden, with blueberries and a little powdered sugar smile. I poured juice. Set out plates. Lit a candle for fun. I waited. Rachel walked into the kitchen first, stopped short, and blinked. "Oh," she said. "You're doing breakfast today?" I smiled. "Thought I'd surprise Jonah." She hesitated. Then, "That's sweet. But we're actually trying no sugar this week. I've got chia pudding ready." I nodded slowly. Ethan walked in next, rubbing his eyes. He looked at the table, the pancakes, then Rachel. "You didn't say we were doing this," he said. She gave him a tight smile. "We weren't." He sat down reluctantly, picked at a pancake. Jonah appeared last, still, in pajamas, hair sticking up. "Blueberry pancakes," he cheered. Rachel crouched down. "No, baby. Remember we talked about your tummy hurting after sugar? But I want them. We're doing chia pudding today." The smile vanished from his face. "I don't want chia." Rachel's tone hardened. "Jonah." He looked from her to me, and I made the smallest, quietest move. I reached over, slid a plate toward him, and winked. He smiled again and started eating. Rachel stood up stiff. "I'll just go start my call," she said, voice clipped. She didn't say thank you, didn't acknowledge the effort, just left me at the table with a grandson who looked happier than he had in weeks. After breakfast, I walked into the living room and stopped cold. The bookshelf. It had been rearranged. All of my books, hundreds of them, used to be organized by subject. Literature, poetry, history, biographies, my life's work, my love. Now they were sorted by color. Blocks of red, blue, yellow, black, white, like a showroom. Some spines were turned backward, pages facing out. For aesthetic. For design. My annotated Middlemarch was stuffed sideways between two candle holders. Rachel walked in behind me. "Nice, right?" I followed this bookstagrammer's guide. I didn't move. "Rachel," I said quietly, "did you ask before you touched these?" She tilted her head. "They were just looking dusty. I thought you'd be happy someone was appreciating them." I turned to face her. I appreciated them. That's why they were in order. She blinked. "Well, maybe your way just wasn't working." I looked at her. I looked through her. And I thought of something the therapist I'd once seen during grief counseling had said: control is rarely taken all at once. It's taken in teaspoons. Rachel was ladling by the cupful now. Later that day, I went to find my gardening gloves, my small act of escape. I loved the feel of dirt, of something growing under my care. But the gloves were missing. I checked the shed, the garage, my car. Nothing. When I asked Rachel, she shrugged. "Maybe you forgot where you put them." I hadn't. That night, I wrote in my journal, "She's moving through the house like wind, erasing me behind her. The gloves are gone, the books are wrong, the music is silent. My name is no longer Mom." I ran my fingers over the page. The words felt like a confession, like betrayal, but also like freedom. Naming the truth is the first act of power. And I was beginning just barely to wake up. It was during breakfast that I first tasted madness. Not because I was losing my grip, but because someone was trying to loosen it for me. The day started like most others lately. Gray light through the blinds, the clink of dishes I didn't dirty, and the quiet hum of Rachel's voice on a call I wasn't meant to overhear. I made myself tea and a slice of toast and sat quietly listening to Jonah chatter to his cereal. Rachel entered a few minutes later. She stopped at the counter, eyeing the bread. "Did you use up the almond butter?" she asked, opening the pantry. "I bought a new jar 2 days ago." I frowned. "No, I haven't touched it." She opened the cabinet again, moving jars. Huh, it's gone, she said, turning to me. Maybe you used it and forgot. I shook my head. I haven't eaten almond butter in months. Rachel smiled, but not with her eyes. It's okay, Eleanor. These things happen. I blinked, heart skipping. It was just a missing jar, wasn't it? But something in her tone didn't sit right. Light, indulgent, vaguely maternal. I pushed the toast away. An hour later, I overheard her on the phone with Ethan. I'm just saying, she said softly. She's misplacing more and more. First the keys, now the food. It's like early signs, you know. My hands went cold. The almond butter, the gloves, the books. Was she trying to make it look like I was forgetting? That evening, I waited until they were out walking Jonah and checked the trash bin under the sink. Nothing. I opened the outside bin, the one I rarely touched. There, half buried under takeout containers, was the almond butter jar, empty. I took a picture with my phone. I didn't know why yet. Just instinct. I began to wonder what else had they planted. A few days later, I found the sugar bowl filled with salt. My tea that morning had tasted wrong. I'd poured it out, thought nothing of it. But now I opened the lid again and dipped my pinky finger in. Salt. I hadn't done that. No one said a word. That night, I checked the laundry Rachel had helped me fold. One of my blouses was missing. A pale lavender one I wore often, soft cotton, faint floral print. Gone. The next morning, Rachel told Ethan that I'd left the kettle on until it whistled dry. But I was right there, I said. I turned it off. You were the one who... She tilted her head. Are you sure the words were light? The smile was polite. But I saw it now, the strategy. Plant doubt. Sprinkle confusion. Smile sweetly. Make it look like I was unraveling. I spent the afternoon in my room, door shut, heart pounding. I wasn't imagining this. I couldn't be. I kept a notebook now, logging every detail, every small manipulation, every strange occurrence. I reread my entries late at night like they were holy scripture, proof of my sanity, but nothing prepared me for what happened that weekend. I was in the kitchen making tea again when Rachel walked in with Jonah. Jonah, she said loudly, go ahead, tell Grandma what you told me. He looked up at her. You said she said bad words? I did, I asked, confused. When Rachel crouched next to him. Remember, you said Grandma yelled yesterday and called someone stupid? Jonah looked unsure. He fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. I don't remember. Rachel chuckled softly. Kids say the funniest things. But her eyes never left mine. After they left the room, I sat down. My hands were shaking. She was scripting memories, weaponizing a child's imagination. This wasn't just manipulation, it was warfare. I called Ethan that night while he was out getting groceries. Ethan, we need to talk. Can it wait, Mom? No, it can't. There was a long pause. Okay, he said finally. She's trying to make me look confused. Like I'm forgetting things. She's playing games. Another pause. A dangerous one. Mom, he said, with that careful voice people use when they think you're fragile. I think maybe you're just stressed. You haven't been yourself. I nearly dropped the phone. No, Ethan. I've been more myself than ever. That's the problem. He sighed. Let's talk about this tomorrow. He hung up before I could say another word. I stared at the screen until it went dark. That was the moment I knew no one was coming to rescue me. I would have to rescue myself. The next morning, I started researching therapists. Not because I thought I needed one, but because I needed documentation. I needed someone outside this house to witness me, to see clearly what was happening. Someone who would write down Eleanor Westcott is lucid, oriented, clear. I found one across town. A quiet woman with gray curls and no-nonsense eyes. Why are you here? She asked. I smiled. Because my daughter-in-law is trying to convince the world that I'm not. I expected her to look at me skeptically, but she didn't. She listened. For 45 minutes, I told her everything. From the missing gloves to the salted tea to the sugar-swapped kindness in Rachel's voice. At the end of the session, she looked me in the eye and said something I'll never forget. "You are not paranoid," she said calmly. "You are being erased." A tear slid down my cheek, not out of sadness, but out of the relief of being seen. We scheduled weekly sessions. I asked if she could keep detailed notes. "Of course," she said. "This story won't stay inside your house forever." And for the first time in months, I walked out into the sunlight feeling real, grounded, present, dangerously aware. I found the photo frame missing from the mantel on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. It was the one of Ethan at age 10 holding a clumsy clay sculpture he made in 5th grade art class. He looked proud and embarrassed all at once, his cheeks smudged with paint, his eyes looking straight into mine. Gone. I searched quietly so no one would notice. The bedroom dresser, the side table drawer, even the box of old Christmas lights in the garage. I finally found it at the very bottom of the hall closet, upside down behind a stack of Rachel's yoga mats and designer tote bags. The glass was cracked. I didn't ask who had moved it. I already knew. That was the day I began to understand the war Rachel was waging wasn't just about my mind, it was about my memory, my identity, my past, my place in this family. When someone wants to erase you, they start with the evidence that you were ever essential. Family photos were the first casualties. They began disappearing one by one like autumn leaves falling in secret. The wedding photo of me and my husband gone. The framed collage of baby Ethan given to me by my sister, gone. The group photo from my retirement party replaced with a neutral landscape print purchased, I would later learn, from Rachel's favorite online boutique. I asked Ethan once gently, "Did you see what happened to the photos?" He shrugged. "Maybe they're in storage. Rachel's been reorganizing." He didn't even look up from his phone. Reorganizing. Such a sterile word for what she was doing. What hurt the most wasn't the missing photos, it was the silence surrounding their absence. As though they'd never mattered. As though I had never mattered. Like my role in their stories had been reduced to background noise. One morning, Jonah came downstairs holding a drawing he'd made in school. A colorful crayon scribble of family 4 stick figures holding hands. "Is this us?" I asked, smiling, pointing to the smallest figure in purple. He shook his head. "No," he said. "That's me, Daddy, Mommy, and the dog." I stared at him, frozen. "Where's Grandma?" I asked gently. He blinked. "You don't live here in the picture," Rachel called from the kitchen. "Come wash your hands, sweetie." He ran off. I sat there holding the drawing, erased in wax crayon. I thought of all the times I'd picked Jonah up from preschool when Rachel was busy. The bedtime stories, the oatmeal I made him with cinnamon hearts, the times I stayed up to wash his muddy socks before school the next day. All of it invisible. All of it lost behind Rachel's careful curation of what family looked like now. At dinner that night, I asked Ethan casually, "Do you remember the trip we took to Lake Winthrop when you were 11? You caught that tiny fish and refused to let it go." He blinked. "Sort of. I mean vaguely." Rachel smirked over her glass. "Was that the trip where you forgot the tent poles I looked up?" "That was a different trip. And no, I didn't forget them. They were in the trunk under the cooler." Rachel laughed. "Ethan said you panicked." I stared at my son. He looked embarrassed. Shrugged. "She gets anxious sometimes," Rachel added softly. "It's okay." The conversation moved on, but my chest stayed tight, my stomach churning. That night, I opened a drawer in my room and pulled out an old album. I flipped through the pages, photos of Ethan covered in lake mud, my husband lighting a campfire, me smiling in a blue hoodie holding a marshmallow stick. We were happy, imperfect, real. I had been there. I had been the center. I knew what had happened. But Rachel was rewriting history out loud and no one was stopping her. I started printing new copies of old photos, ones I had saved digitally years ago. I hid them in books in my dresser drawers under the cushions of the armchair I loved. I needed reminders, anchors, proof. One morning, I heard Rachel on the phone in the living room. She's just so stuck in the past, always bringing up old stories, like she doesn't want to move on. A pause. Then it's sad, really. She doesn't realize the world's moved forward without her. Moved forward, like I was debris caught on the rocks. After that, I noticed other things changing. My teacup vanished from the cabinet, the one with the pale green vines. It was replaced with a newer mug gray with the word breathe etched in script. Even my cups were being edited. I asked Rachel once softly, "Did you get rid of my teacup?" She blinked. "Which one?" "The one with the vines." "It was a gift from my sister." She tilted her head thinking. "Oh, that chipped one, I thought it was trash." "Sorry." She wasn't. She smiled as she said it. I went upstairs and cried in the hallway quietly as always. I knew what this was now. It was death by deletion. Not murder. Not cruelty with blood. Just a quiet, deliberate erasure of everything that proved I once mattered. And Ethan, he was watching it happen. He may not have lifted the brush, but he stood still as the painting was scrubbed away. I looked around my home and realized how little of me remained. The furniture had been shifted. The walls were neutralized. The laughter was no longer mine. But I hadn't disappeared. Not yet. Because I still remembered. And memory truth has power. Even when no one wants to believe it. Especially then. Jonah was coloring at the dining table when I overheard it. Rachel was on the phone, her voice just soft enough to seem innocent, just loud enough that I could hear every word. I mean, it's hard, living with someone who's not quite there anymore. She was silent for a moment, listening. Then, no diagnosis yet. But there are signs. Confusion. Repeating herself. Jonah's been asking questions. I froze at the foot of the stairs, my breath caught. Jonah looked up at me, then his wide, curious eyes locking onto mine. "Hi, Grandma," he said quietly. I smiled, but something behind my ribs went cold. Later that evening, he came into my room while Rachel was upstairs bathing. He held one of his little stuffed animals, a worn, fuzzy fox he never let go of, and stood awkwardly near the door. "Grandma," he said, "are you sick in your head?" The question was soft, not cruel, just sincere. I closed the book I'd been pretending to read. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "Why do you ask?" "Because Mommy says sometimes you forget things. Like Daddy's name." I blinked. "Do I seem like I've forgotten Daddy's name?" He shook his head. "You always remember stuff. Like my birthdays." "That's right," I whispered. "And I always will." He walked closer and hugged me without a word. Then patted out the door. And I sat there holding nothing and realized this wasn't just emotional erosion anymore. It was weaponization. They were using him. Poisoning his trust, teaching him to question me before he even knew what trust meant. That night, I found a crayon drawing on the kitchen counter. One of Jonah's. He was always drawing robots and race cars. This one was different. It showed a woman with gray hair in a chair frowning. Beside her, a speech bubble. "I'm fine." And above her head, big red letters. "Crazy lady." I stared at it for minutes, until the lines blurred. When I showed it to Ethan later that night, he looked surprised, even mildly amused. "Kids draw weird stuff, Mom." Did Rachel tell him I was crazy? He scratched his neck. She might have joked. You know how she is. I shook my head slowly. "This isn't a joke." He sighed, visibly uncomfortable. "You're overthinking this." I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I simply folded the paper and placed it into my journal. Another page in the archive of my own survival. Rachel once said in passing, "Sometimes I wonder if we're doing Jonah more harm than good letting him see this every day." This. That word landed like a punch. Not you, not her, not Grandma, just this. Like I was a condition, a problem, a fog creeping through the hallway. She looked me straight in the eye when she said it. Later that night, I caught her whispering to Ethan in the kitchen. Their silhouettes backlit by the refrigerator light were tense. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Ethan nod. Slowly, as if resigned. The next morning, my therapist confirmed my suspicion. "She's priming Jonah," she said. "And probably Ethan. Slowly seeding the idea that you're unstable. And they're doing it so gradually that when the time comes, no one will question it. The time for what I asked." She looked at me solemnly. "To take over. To remove you. Or declare you unfit." The word hung between us. Unfit. I could see it now, the slow trap being built. Quiet rumors, misplaced keys, switched pills, misquotes, confusion, whispers to the child, the theft of photos, routines, memories. I wasn't paranoid. I was being framed. I left the therapist's office with a list of instructions. Keep documenting. Record conversations. Don't react emotionally, respond with silence and memory. Preserve all correspondence. Find an attorney discreetly. I smiled at the therapist as I left, but inside I was trembling. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was premeditated erasure. That night, I found Jonah sitting on the floor with Rachel. She was whispering to him, brushing his hair back, smiling gently. "Sometimes people forget who they are, baby," she said. "And that's okay. But when they get confused, it's not your job to fix it." Jonah didn't respond. He just clutched his fox. Then Rachel looked up and saw me watching from the hall. She didn't flinch. She simply smiled and said, "Say goodnight to Grandma, sweetheart." Jonah turned. "Good night, Grandma." I nodded. "Good night, my love." I waited for Rachel to leave the room before whispering to myself, "I remember exactly who I am, and I would prove it." They began watching me, not with open suspicion, but with the careful attentiveness one might show an aging pet, affection tinged with quiet evaluation, as if they were waiting for signs that I might start walking into walls or forgetting the days of the week. The first camera was disguised as a smoke detector. I noticed it while dusting the hallway. It blinked. Only once. A single flicker. But I've always had a keen eye. I stood beneath it for several seconds, then stepped away. I returned an hour later and saw the tiny light again. This time, it followed my movement. That evening, I walked into the kitchen and smiled. "Rachel, did you install a new smoke alarm in the hallway?" She didn't even pause. "Yeah, we upgraded to one with CO2 detection. Better safety." I nodded. "That's smart." But the moment I was alone, I searched the model online. It wasn't a smoke detector. It was a nanny cam, motion sensitive with two-way audio and cloud backup. So they were listening now. I said nothing. That weekend, Rachel rearranged the medicine cabinet to make things easier. My prescription bottles were in a different order. Some of the labels had sticky notes on them with times I hadn't written. "Take with food, 8 a.m. I never took it in the morning." She said she was just trying to help. Then my reading glasses disappeared. I always left them on the nightstand. But they were gone. I looked everywhere. 2 days later, Rachel found them under the couch cushions. "You probably forgot where you left them," she said, smiling. "I've never put them there in my life," I replied. "Well, maybe Jonah was playing with them." He wasn't. I'd started locking my bedroom door. She didn't like that. "You know," she said one day while drying dishes, "we're worried about your safety. What if there's an emergency and we can't get to you?" I stirred my tea. "I'm perfectly safe." She tilted her head. "Locks don't protect you from yourself." I felt it then, the fear underneath her calm voice. Not fear for me, fear of me, because I wasn't falling apart like she'd hoped. I was staying upright, focused, and worst of all, I was quiet. That week, I placed a call to an old friend of my husband's, a semi-retired lawyer named Carl, who had attended our wedding, sent us a bottle of wine every anniversary for 27 years, and who'd always said, "If you ever need a friend with a pen, I'm yours." We met in a coffee shop across town. I didn't tell anyone. I need help, I said, handing him a printout of the journal entries I'd made, dates, events, names, evidence. He read in silence, then looked up. "This is coercive control," he said plainly. "It's subtle, but it's real. You're not imagining this." "I think they're building a case," I said, "to have me declared unfit." "Mentally." Carl nodded. "We'll get ahead of it." We spent 2 hours crafting a strategy. I would grant him limited financial power of attorney, not Ethan. I would update my will, removing Ethan and Rachel as executors and beneficiaries. We would begin documenting every manipulated incident. We'd store backups of the video files I was about to start collecting. I already knew where I'd hide my recorder, behind the orchids on the sideboard. I'd always loved orchids. So delicate. So stubborn. They bloom when no one expects it. I left the cafe feeling strangely taller. They were watching me. But now I was watching them. 3 nights later, I pretended to forget something. Dinner was on the table. I set out 4 plates instead of 3. Rachel looked at me. Expecting someone, I blinked. "Didn't your mother say she was coming?" Rachel froze. "My mother lives in Florida." "Oh, that's right." She watched me, suspicious. I let my fingers tremble just slightly. Not too much. I must have confused the days. Ethan patted my hand like one would a child. "It's okay, Mom." Inside I smiled. Let them believe it. If they wanted the act, I would give them a performance worthy of Shakespeare. Every false moment they'd constructed, I would echo it back to them. Each confusion, each mistake, now I made them intentionally. I called the microwave the oven. I poured orange juice into my cereal. I asked Rachel how old Jonah was twice in the same day. She began smiling more often, but Ethan started to worry. I could see it in his face. Once I passed him in the hallway and said softly, "You always wanted to visit Prague, didn't you?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah." "Why?" I shrugged. "Just checking what I remember." He didn't smile. Rachel doubled down. She began collecting my mail for me, in case you lose something. She offered to sort my medications every Sunday, just for convenience. I let her, but I made sure to quietly switch the pills back after she left the room. In the evenings, I'd sit by the window and write. I wrote everything. Every word said. Every glance. Every silence. I saved the documents under plain names on an encrypted USB drive tucked behind a false drawer panel in my room. One night, I overheard them in the living room. "Rachel, it's happening faster than I expected." "Ethan, she's getting worse. Do we call someone, Rachel?" "We'll talk to the lawyer first. Once we get control of her finances, we can get her the help she needs." The help she needs. I gripped the recorder in my hand. So this was it. The real plan. It wasn't just about pushing me aside. They wanted control. Of the house. Of the money. Of me. But they didn't know. I already had everything I needed. The next time someone tried to call me crazy, I'd have proof that I'd been the only sane one all along, and the real madness was thinking I wouldn't fight back. My first visit to Dr. Laird, the therapist I'd chosen, had been about survival. By the 3rd session, it had turned into strategy. I told her about the surveillance cameras, the whispering, the salt swapped in my sugar jar, the diary I kept hidden under my mattress like a teenager guarding her secrets. She didn't look shocked. Instead, she nodded slowly and said, "You're not just being watched, Eleanor. You're being prepared. I blinked. Prepared. They're building a foundation, so that when the time comes, no one will question their decision. What decision? She leaned forward. To strip you of autonomy. That word stayed with me all the way home. Autonomy. Not freedom. Not rights. Autonomy. Like I was a malfunctioning device that needed to be overridden. When I got back that afternoon, Rachel was in the kitchen making green juice. The blender whirred like an alarm. I walked past her slowly, deliberately. Did you take your pill today? She asked, voice light, almost musical. I think so, I said with a small frown. Or maybe I already did. She smiled. Don't worry, I'm keeping track for you. Of course she was. I went upstairs, locked the door, and pulled the recorder out from its hiding spot behind the orchid pot. So far, I had 20 hours of audio. Whispers. Gaslighting. Rachel's voice telling Ethan. She forgot Jonah's birthday. I hadn't. I'd made his cake from scratch. Ethan muttering, "She seems tired all the time." Of course I was tired. Being hunted in your own home is exhausting. I sent the recordings to Carl the lawyer. He replied with one line, "It's starting to sound like intent." That was when I began to plan. Real plans. Not just quiet resistance but offense. Carl helped me draft new legal documents. A medical directive naming him and Dr. Laird as trusted third parties. A new power of attorney, again, not Ethan. And most importantly, a rewritten will. I kept the originals locked away. I gave Carl digital copies. And I told no one. Meanwhile, Rachel grew bolder. She asked if she could tidy up my bedroom, then moved. My books shifted, the lamps rearranged the closet. It's easier to find things now, she said, placing a labeled box on my dresser. The label read, Eleanor's Keepsakes. Inside were letters from my late husband. A baby onesie of Ethan's I'd kept. An old photo of my sister and I at the beach. Keepsakes. Past tense. As if I were already gone. I bought a small camera. It looked like a pen. I clipped it to the edge of my bookshelf, angled perfectly toward the kitchen where most of the episodes happened. Rachel loudly suggesting I forgot something, Ethan sighing me, sitting quietly while the scene unfolded. The camera caught everything. And so did my recorder. One day, while Rachel was out, I went into her bedroom. I know. I shouldn't have. But I needed to see. In her nightstand drawer was a folder labeled Conservatorship Options, Elder Care. There were printed documents from legal sites, a checklist, notes with bullet points, forgetfulness, document frequency, evidence of confusion, record or witness, doctor's confirmation of mental decline, justify removal of financial control. I stood there holding the folder in my hands and my ears filled with white noise. It was real. Every suspicion, every creeping doubt. It wasn't paranoia. They were plotting to steal my life. I returned the folder exactly as I'd found it. Then I went back to my room, turned on the recorder, and said aloud, "Today is Thursday. I am of sound mind. I found a folder detailing steps for a conservatorship. They are planning to institutionalize me. I am not confused. I am being hunted." My voice trembled, but I did not. That weekend they had friends over. Rachel cooked. Ethan poured drinks. I sat at the edge of the couch, uninvited, unseen. Someone asked about the house. Was it still technically mine? Rachel laughed. Oh yes, but we're helping out. You know how it is. And someone replied, It's so sweet of you to take care of her. It must be hard. Rachel nodded. It is. But we love her. I excused myself to the bathroom and vomited into the sink. Not because of what she said, because they believed her. Because it was working. The next day, I asked Ethan to help me with something in the attic. He followed me up, ducking under the wooden beam. I handed him a box. Inside were photos, letters, recordings. I want you to look through these, I said. When you have time. He blinked. What is this? It's everything you're forgetting, I said. Everything she wants you to forget. He didn't speak. Just held the box like it weighed more than it did. I'm not gone, Ethan, I said. But if you keep going like this, one day you'll look up and realize I've disappeared and you helped make it happen. His face changed. Subtle. Not guilt. Not yet. But doubt. The first crack in the wall she'd built around him. And sometimes that's all you need. A crack. To let the truth bleed through. The box I gave Ethan sat on his desk for 3 days unopened. I know because I checked. Quietly at night after they went to sleep. I'd tiptoe past his door, see the cardboard edge still sealed with a single strip of packing tape. Untouched. Waiting. On the 4th day, it disappeared. I noticed that it wasn't on the desk anymore, but I didn't ask. I didn't dare. I simply noted the time in my journal, day 94. Box is gone. No comment. Ethan quiet. Rachel humming in the kitchen. Jonah distant. Jonah had changed. It wasn't anything obvious. He still asked me to tie his shoes. Still offered me broken pieces of cookie. Still called me grandma. But something behind his eyes had shifted. He no longer lingered after story time. He no longer snuggled beside me on the couch. He had absorbed the air in the house, thin with suspicion flavored with caution. Children are brilliant that way. They know when adults are afraid, even if the adults smile while they're twisting the knife. One afternoon, I caught Rachel kneeling beside him in the backyard. She had a toy truck in her hand and was whispering something, her lips close to his ear. I opened the door loudly to announce myself. She turned, startled, her face too fast to smile. Jonah looked up. Grandma, are you feeling better now? I blinked. Better from what, sweetheart? He frowned. From being confused. Mommy says you're having a hard time remembering things. I knelt down, looked him in the eye, and said softly, Do I seem confused to you? He hesitated, then shook his head. Rachel was already standing. I told him not to worry, she said with a light laugh. You know how kids are, they repeat everything. That night I wrote, They're teaching him to doubt me. Not through discipline, but suggestion. Fear by affection. He will remember a version of me that never existed. Unless I stop it. 2 days later, Ethan knocked on my bedroom door. He never knocked anymore. I opened it slowly, expecting Rachel's voice, but found him alone, hands in his hoodie pockets, face pinched. I read everything he said. I waited. The recordings, the notes, the photos you saved, the lawyer emails. I still said nothing. He looked down. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I replied. Just stop pretending nothing is happening. I didn't know how far she'd gone, he said. At first I thought she was just trying to help. But the medicine switch, the camera in the hallway, the way she talks to Jonah when you're not around. He trailed off. And that's when I knew something had cracked open. Ethan wasn't gone. Not completely. I just had to reach what was left. He sat on the edge of my bed, face pale. She told me you left the stove on, that you almost set the house on fire. I haven't used the stove in 3 weeks, I said. She's the one who turned the burner on when I was out. He stared at me. She wants full control, I continued. Legal, financial, physical, all of it. He nodded. He paused. I wanted to believe she had good intentions. Belief is a luxury, Ethan. Survival is not. I placed my hand over his. And for the first time in years, he didn't pull away. That night, I saw him walking with Rachel in the driveway. Their voices were low but tense. She was waving her arms. He was still. Listening. Watching. She turned away from him suddenly and stormed inside. Our eyes met as she passed me. Something in her had changed. Not fear. Not yet. But awareness. She knew I wasn't playing the fool anymore, and she hated it. The next morning, the camera in the hallway was gone. So was the smart speaker in the living room. Rachel avoided me all day. She didn't say a word during breakfast. She didn't criticize my music. She didn't touch the pantry. That night, Ethan came to me again. I told her I'm not going along with it. With what? With the conservatorship? With the plan. I told her I won't sign anything. That if she tries, I'll go to Carl. I looked at him carefully. What did she say? She said I'd regret it. I nodded. She's not used to losing control. He shifted uncomfortably. She still thinks you're faking the forgetfulness, he added. Good, I said. Let her. Then I handed him a USB drive. What's this? The rest of the story. Backup copies. Just in case. In case of what? In case she makes one last move. He took it. And for the first time in months, I slept without fear. But deep inside, I knew Rachel wouldn't go down quietly. People like her never do. They don't let go. They latch. They devour until there's nothing left. But this time, I wasn't going to starve in silence. I woke to silence. Not the comforting hush of a peaceful morning, but the sharp kind, the kind that feels prepared. Something was off. No smell of coffee, no soft clink of dishes, no early morning voice from the TV. I walked downstairs expecting to find Rachel at the kitchen table, laptop, open eyes, watching, but she wasn't there. Neither was Ethan. Then I saw the paper, folded neatly on the countertop. My name scrawled on the front in her handwriting. I opened it, hands trembling despite myself. Eleanor. You've been struggling more than you realize. Ethan and I have talked, and we agree that it's time for professional help. There's a place we've found that specializes in cognitive wellness for seniors. A doctor will be coming by later today to assess things. Please understand this is for your safety and Jonah's. Rachel. I sat down. The world tilted slightly. There it was. The final move. She was going to have me declared. She must have forged papers, found a complicit doctor, or maybe just someone on her side. Maybe she'd cherry-picked recordings, twisted words, built a tidy little case. This was her checkmate. Except, she didn't know I'd already flipped the board. I picked up the phone and called Carl. He didn't answer. He never did right away, but I left a message and sent a follow-up text. It's happening. She's sending someone today. We go live now. Then I opened my email and clicked send on a pre-drafted letter, one that included every time-stamped recording, my therapist's documentation confirming full cognitive health, Carl's notarized legal paperwork, and copies of Rachel's own handwriting outlining her strategy. I sent it to Ethan, Carl, my therapist, and one other recipient, Rachel. Let her see it. Let her feel it. The truth delivered like a dagger wrapped in calm. I didn't wait. I dressed deliberately, navy cardigan, pearl earrings, light makeup. I sat in the sunroom with my orchid pot recorder blinking red beside it, waiting. And sure enough, at 10:43 a.m., the doorbell rang. Rachel's voice called up the stairs. Eleanor, someone's here to talk with you. I didn't answer. The woman who entered introduced herself as Dr. Bloom. Middle-aged, soft voice, carrying a clipboard. Rachel stood behind her arms, crossed, face blank. Hi, Eleanor, Dr. Bloom said gently. Would it be all right if we spoke for a few minutes? I nodded. Of course. She sat across from me, pen poised. We just want to ask a few questions to get a sense of how you're doing. I smiled. That's fine. But before we begin, you should know this conversation is being recorded. Dr. Bloom looked up. Rachel shifted. Oh, I added, reaching into my side drawer, and I've prepared a packet for you. I handed over a folder, my latest cognitive assessment from Dr. Laird, a notarized statement from Carl, and a printed transcript of Rachel's most damning audio clips. Dr. Bloom opened it. Read silently. Page after page. The air in the room changed. Finally, she closed the folder and looked up. Rachel, she said, her voice flat. Could I speak with you privately? Rachel blinked. Of course. They stepped into the hallway. The door closed. I heard muffled voices, low, sharp, increasingly frantic. Then silence. Then footsteps. Dr. Bloom left the house without another word. Rachel returned, her face pale. Her mouth opened, then closed again. I sat there still and calm. "What did you do?" she hissed. "I told the truth," I said. "You had no right." "You had no soul," I replied. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and stormed up the stairs. I stayed seated. For the first time in a year, I was still, and she was the one unraveling. That evening, Ethan came home early. He'd read everything, heard the clips, spoken to Carl. He walked in quietly and set his phone on the table between us. "I told her she needs to leave," he said. "She screamed, cried, packed 3 bags. She took Jonah." "No," he said. "She tried." I said no. I looked up, stunned. "You kept him?" He nodded. "Until custody gets sorted. Carl's helping." I didn't speak for a moment. Then I asked the one question that mattered. "Do you believe me now?" His eyes filled. "I believed you too late." I reached for his hand, but not too late for Jonah. Rachel left that night. There were no grand scenes, no tears on the porch, just the slam of a car door and red taillights vanishing down the road. She didn't say goodbye. Not that I expected her to. Predators don't weep when the hunt fails. They vanish and wait to find another host. But she wouldn't come back here. Not ever again. Not with the documentation, the recordings, the lawyers, the case. Her game was over, and I had won. Quietly, without raising my voice, just by being the thing she underestimated most. Prepared. I expected peace after Rachel left. I expected the house to breathe again, to stretch out its bones and shake off her scent like a storm had passed. But silence after war is not peace. It's an echo of what was lost. For days, I wandered the halls of my own home, reacquainting myself with the spaces I'd retreated from. I found my favorite teacup buried at the back of a cabinet. My grandmother's quilt, once folded over the couch, had been stuffed into a plastic storage bin in the garage. I brought them back out like survivors from a wreckage. The photo of Ethan with the clay sculpture, I framed it again, placed it in the center of the mantel. I dusted off my old books and returned them to the shelves in the order I preferred, by author, not color. I brought my Chopin records back into the living room. Jonah sat on the carpet, eyes wide, as the soft piano began to play. "Is this old music?" he asked. I smiled. "Yes. And beautiful." He nodded solemnly, resting his chin on his knees. Ethan stood in the doorway watching, saying nothing, but I saw it, the recognition, the quiet shame, the boy I'd raised coming back into his own skin. Later that night, he approached me. "I keep thinking about what she said," he murmured. "What? Who?" said Rachel. "She used to say you were slipping, that you'd start confusing your past for the present, that one day you'd forget who you even were." I didn't respond. He lowered himself into the armchair across from me. But now I realize that's what she was doing. Trying to erase your present so we'd only remember the version of you she created. The one that needed saving. I looked at him long and quiet. "I never needed saving. I needed witnessing." He nodded. "And I failed you." I reached across the space and took his hand. "You were misled," I said gently. "You were poisoned slowly. Like I was." He squeezed my fingers. "I want to fix this." "You already started," I replied. And I meant it. Because as much as I'd been devastated by Rachel's presence, nothing had cut deeper than Ethan's absence. His silence had been the sharpest betrayal of all. But now here he was, reclaiming his voice. And mine. That week we began rebuilding. He removed the hidden hallway camera mount himself. I deleted the nanny cam footage from the cloud, but not the copies. I still had those stored in 2 separate USBs. Just in case. Jonah returned to me slowly, cautiously. We baked cookies one afternoon. Real cookies, not the chia seed oat-free kind Rachel insisted on. He looked up at me while licking the batter and whispered, "You're not confused." "No," I said. I'm not. But Mommy said, sometimes I said gently, people lie to protect what they want, not what's right. He nodded. She was mean. She was scared. Of losing control. He blinked. Are you scared? No, I said, brushing flour off his nose. I'm finally free. But freedom, I realized, isn't quiet. It rings. It echoes. It wakes you at 2 a.m. with the realization that you survived but not unscarred. I still double-check doors. I still leave notes for myself even when I don't need to. I still keep one recorder hidden in the orchid pot, not because I suspect Ethan again, but because trauma makes you prepare for battles long after the war is over. And yet, the sun looks different. The kitchen feels lighter. My voice is louder. Sometimes I catch myself humming again while I clean the windows, or speaking aloud to the cat I don't own. That's how healing begins. Not with triumph, but with permission to exist again. One afternoon, I sat Jonah down. I pulled out a photo album one Rachel had tried to discard. Do you want to know what Daddy was like when he was little? I asked. He grinned. Yes. We flipped pages. I told stories. About the time Ethan swallowed a marble. About how he once tried to flush an entire Lego set down the toilet. About how he cried the first time a butterfly landed on his arm. Jonah laughed. He asked questions. I answered all of them. And when he asked Will, "You forget me someday, Grandma," I placed my hand over his and said, "Never." Because I wouldn't. Not even if my memory did fade one day. Because truth isn't just what we remember, it's what we preserve. And I had preserved everything, not just for me, but for him. So one day, if Rachel ever returned, if she ever tried to rewrite the past again, he would know the real story. And who told it first? The rain was gentle that morning, tapping on the kitchen windows like a quiet knock from an old friend. I stood over the stove watching the kettle begin to hiss steam, curling upward like a breath I hadn't exhaled in weeks. Freedom, I was learning, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself in fireworks or applause. It came softly in ordinary moments, the luxury of boiling tea without someone checking your hand. The stillness of a house that no longer whispered against you. But the illusion of calm didn't last. Rachel's shadow lingered in the walls. It was a Tuesday when I opened the mail and saw it, her handwriting unmistakable, slanted with aggression disguised as elegance. My name scrawled across the envelope like a dare. Inside a letter, and a copy of a legal petition. Petition for shared guardianship. Filed in another county, dated 2 weeks prior to her departure. I stood there, knees weakening, rereading the same paragraph again and again. The respondent, Eleanor Westcott, has demonstrated behaviors consistent with early cognitive decline. Temporary guardianship is requested to ensure the safety of minor grandchild. Petitioner claims prior verbal agreement with respondent regarding healthcare and estate management. I laughed. A dry, humorless thing. She had planned this even while pretending to leave quietly. Even as her bags were packed, even as Ethan had told her it was over, she'd already laid down another trap. I walked to the sink, hands trembling, and tore the envelope in half, then into quarters, then into confetti. But inside, the dread was crawling back. What if a judge didn't care about my journal or my audio? What if one lie said often enough could still eclipse the truth I called Carl? He answered on the first ring. She filed a petition, I said. I know, he replied calmly. We intercepted the notification already. It won't stand. I swallowed hard. What if she filed it in the wrong county, Eleanor? The judge already flagged it for lack of jurisdiction. It's a bluff. An expensive, desperate one. But a bluff. I exhaled for the first time in a minute. She's still trying to take control, I whispered. Yes, he said. Because you still have it. That's what makes her dangerous. That's what makes her afraid. That night, I locked my doors. Not because I thought Rachel would return in person, but because I needed to reclaim my boundaries emotionally, physically, legally. No one would cross my threshold again without my permission. The following week, I made a decision. I reached out to the local family court myself, not to press charges, not yet, but to file a preventive order of vulnerability. It was a legal measure. Carl suggested a way to formally declare my mental competency and protect my estate from unauthorized guardianship attempts. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't draw headlines, but it was like building a stone wall between myself and the storm. Inside, I began to rebuild more than my legal footing. I began to rebuild my sense of self. I started small morning walks, a new puzzle on the kitchen table. I reopened the tutoring service I had shuttered during Ethan and Rachel's stay, just 2 students a week, teenage girls struggling with English literature. One of them, a shy redhead named Lila, reminded me of myself at 16, curious, bookish, waiting for someone to notice her brilliance. "You make poems sound like spells," she told me once after I explained Sylvia Plath's mirror. "They are," I said. "Words are the only kind of magic that leaves fingerprints." She smiled. In that moment, I felt something like purpose again. Jonah began sleeping over more often. Ethan dropped him off with apologies and careful questions, always afraid he was imposing. "He sleeps better here," Ethan said once. "It's the silence," I replied. "Children need quiet to feel safe." Rachel apparently had moved back in with her parents. She'd stopped responding to Ethan's texts. There were murmurs of her threatening legal action, but none of it stuck. Carl had prepared every angle. Still, I never stopped watching the shadows. Sometimes at night, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps that would never come. I'd catch myself testing my memory, whispering old addresses to myself. I'd recite Shakespeare's sonnets. I'd quiz myself on Latin phrases. Not because I had to, but because she had made me question the muscle of my own mind. And even now, I was afraid to lose it. To lose me. That fear was real. Because even after you've proven your sanity, the seed of doubt they planted grows in silence. One Sunday afternoon, I took Jonah to the park. We fed ducks. He climbed the big slide 3 times without help. He laughed bright and wild. And then he asked, "Is Mommy ever coming back?" I looked up at the sky, gathering my words carefully. "I think Mommy needs time," I said slowly. "Did you make her leave?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. She left when she realized I wasn't going to let her lie anymore." He frowned. "She said you were broken." I took his small hand in mine. "I'm not broken. I was betrayed." "There's a difference." He nodded solemnly, chewing on his lip. Then, in the smallest voice, "But I'm glad you're still here. I'll always be here," I whispered, "even when you can't see me." A few weeks later, I hosted a dinner. Just Ethan, Jonah, and my sister Claire, who had stayed away during the chaos because she couldn't stand confrontation. But now she came holding flowers and a bottle of wine, and eyes filled with cautious apology. "I should have checked in more," she said. "You did what you had to," I replied. "Now we're here." We toasted, we laughed. I played Chopin again, and this time, no one turned down the volume. After dessert, Jonah curled up beside me on the couch. His eyes fluttered closed, warm and heavy. "I think he feels safe again," Claire said. "I do too," Ethan added. I didn't speak. I just held Jonah tighter. Because safety isn't declared, it's earned, and it must be guarded like treasure. Especially from those who come disguised as family. Especially from parasites. Because that's what Rachel was. Not a villain in a fairy tale. Not some wild monster. A parasite. Charming. Polished. Smiling while she drained you dry. And I had let her in. But never again. This time I remembered what I was. Not a patient. Not a burden. A woman. A mother. And the one who'd survived everything she tried to bury me with. The front porch had become my quiet temple. Every morning I sat with a cup of tea, always the green vine teacup, now watching the world exhale, birds tracing the sky like calligraphy, cars passing at a sleepy suburban pace, a neighbor jogging with her dog. Nothing exceptional, nothing headline-worthy. But to me, it was recovery. I wasn't healing from something visible. No bandages, no casts. I was healing from being questioned out of existence. And some mornings the silence still unsettled me, not because it was hollow, but because it reminded me of the silence they used Rachel's performative kindness, Ethan's quiet complicity, even Jonah's innocent parroting of lies he didn't yet understand. Now, the silence was mine again. That morning, I heard the mail drop through the slot and walked slowly toward the door, bracing for another envelope from Rachel's attorney or some ghost of her last play. But it wasn't that. It was a small, unassuming envelope. No return address. Inside a single sheet of paper. No legal jargon. No signature. Just a sentence: "You think you've won, but it's not over." There was no name, but I didn't need one. The timing, the tone, the handwriting, it reeked of her. I stared at it for a long time, the words bleeding into my chest like cold water seeping through cloth. Then I folded the paper calmly, walked to the fireplace, and lit a match. I watched it burn, crackling into a soft curl of gray ash. She wanted a response. That was the real message, not the threat, but the invitation. Engage me. Show me you're still afraid. But I wasn't. Not anymore. Fear was a reflex, not a residence, and I had moved out of that house for good. Later that day, Ethan stopped by unexpectedly. Jonah ran in first, flinging his arms around me. "Grandma, can I show you what I made in school?" "Of course," I said, smiling. He pulled out a drawing from his backpack, bright-colored crayons and glitter. A house with a tree, a dog, a boy, and an older woman in glasses standing by the porch. I pointed to her. "Is that me?" He beamed. "Yes. And you're holding cookies." Ethan watched from the doorway, something unreadable in his expression. "Can I talk to you?" he asked quietly after Jonah ran to the kitchen. We sat on the porch, the sky overcast but calm. "I got a call," he said. "From Rachel." I waited. "She said she's going to file for partial custody." My stomach tightened, but I didn't flinch. Based on what he shook his head. "Nothing. Just threats. She says she's entitled. That I'm unfit for cutting her out. That you poisoned me against her." "She's projecting," I said. "She's unraveling. And she's grasping at anything that looks like control." He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "I told her she'd have to fight me in court. And you. And Carl. And Jonah's therapist who's been documenting everything." I turned sharply. "He's in therapy." Ethan nodded. "Since she left. I wanted him to have a safe space. She did more damage than I realized. More than he realized." There was a long pause. Then, "Thank you," I said softly. He looked at me. "For what?" "For choosing him over her. For choosing truth." He stared into the distance. "I chose late. But you still chose." That night, I pulled out an old photo album, one I hadn't dared open in over a year. The leather was cracked. The pages had faded slightly, but the memories inside were intact. My wedding day. Ethan's first steps. My husband's graduation speech. Our family trip to the Grand Canyon. Christmas mornings. Summer in Cape Cod. Rainy Tuesdays when all we had was soup and stories. I ran my fingers across the photographs like Braille reading the shape of a life I had built with quiet endurance. Rachel didn't erase me. She tried. But she didn't succeed. Because every lie she told had been met with one stubborn, unwavering truth I never stopped remembering. The next day I planted new orchids. The old ones had survived the chaos, but they'd stopped blooming as if they too had been holding their breath. I placed the new ones beside them, one white, one violet, one a deep, bruised crimson. Jonah came outside and watched. "Why 3?" he asked. "One for who I was," I said. "One for who I am, and one for who I'll still become." He nodded slowly as though memorizing that. "I want to grow something too," he said. So I gave him his own pot and helped him bury marigold seeds beneath the soil. He patted it gently. "They'll be safe here." Yes, I thought. Safe. Such a small word. Such a colossal thing. But healing wasn't linear. A week later, I went to retrieve a sweater from the laundry room and found it torn. Not shredded, but ripped at the collar a precise slice. Not an accident. Not wear and tear. Sabotage. It had been a favorite soft cotton deep green, something my husband once bought me after a bad week. I stood there holding it like a question. And I realized Rachel had likely done it before she left. A seed she'd planted knowing it would bloom long after she was gone. I sat down on the edge of the washer and wept. Not for the sweater. Not even for the threat. But for the invasion. Even in absence, she'd managed to pull me back into that space of suspicion, of scanning the corners, of wondering what had been touched, turned twisted. I brought the sweater upstairs and laid it out on the bed. Then I sewed it, stitch by stitch. It wasn't perfect when I was done, but it was whole. Just like me. A month passed. The courts rejected Rachel's petition on the grounds of insufficient evidence and emotional instability. Carl forwarded me the summary with a simple note. Closed. Permanently. Ethan called me that night. "She's gone quiet," he said. "Blocked my number. No new filings." "That's good," I replied. "No," he said. "It's just quiet, like the eye of a storm." I paused. "Or like someone who's realized their storm isn't working anymore." He exhaled. "Maybe. Either way," I added, "we'll be ready. Always." He didn't respond. But I could hear the gratitude in his silence. It was the sound of a son learning how to protect finally after all these years of watching me do it alone. That weekend, I hosted a small gathering. Claire, my 2 tutoring students, a neighbor who'd helped me with groceries when Rachel had made me feel too foolish to shop alone, and Ethan, of course, with Jonah, who insisted on making name cards out of construction paper. I made meatloaf. I played music. I laughed. No one mentioned Rachel. No one had to. I wasn't celebrating revenge. I was celebrating return. To myself. To the woman who had once been buried under politeness and fear and exhaustion. The woman who remembered birthdays and quotes, and the passwords to all her accounts no matter what Rachel tried to say. That night when everyone was gone, I stood alone in the hallway. I looked around. No cameras, no boxes labeled keepsakes, no locked cabinets. Just my house. Just me. And I said it aloud just to hear the words echo through every corner that used to trap me. I am still here. And I never left. The day started like any other. It was early spring light wind brushing through the open windows, the smell of fresh earth rising from the flower beds I'd tended myself. I was in the kitchen boiling eggs for Jonah's lunchbox. He was due over that afternoon, his favorite blue backpack packed with stickers and crayon drawings, Ethan texting me updates as they left the house. That's when the doorbell rang. I glanced at the clock, 10:08 a.m. Too early for Ethan. Too early for Claire. And I hadn't ordered anything. Cautiously, I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door. Rachel stood there, as if she'd never left. Hair straighter, eyes sharper, smile tighter than ever before. "Good morning," she said sweetly. I blinked. For a moment I thought it was a dream, some elaborate echo, the mind playing games. But no, she was real. Standing on my porch with her expensive coat and her self-made righteousness, holding a thin manila folder in one hand, like a threat wrapped in paper. "I don't remember inviting you," I said. She laughed. "Oh, Eleanor. Still so theatrical." I didn't move, didn't invite her in. I kept one hand on the edge of the door. "I came to talk," she continued. Civilly. I doubt that. She tilted her head. I thought we could avoid dragging each other through the mud, especially for Jonah's sake. I felt it then, the tactic. The bait. I smiled. You already tried mud. You just weren't very good at slinging it. She shifted her weight. You're not well, Eleanor. That hasn't changed. And yet, every doctor says otherwise. I don't mean cognitively, she said, voice softening to a false sincerity. I mean emotionally. You've twisted Ethan into thinking I'm some manipulative monster, when really I was the only one holding this family together. I let out a breath. You were holding it by the throat, I said. She stepped forward, hand brushing the edge of the doorframe. I've filed a motion for joint custody of Jonah. I didn't blink. I didn't gasp. Because I had expected this. Carl had prepared me. Claire had rehearsed statements with me. Ethan had already notified the court. I'm aware, I said. She looked momentarily thrown. I smiled. You might be used to walking into rooms where people are unprepared. This isn't one of them. Rachel's eyes narrowed. If you think the courts won't consider your age, your medical history. Let's talk about your history, I interrupted. Your forged letters, your hidden cameras, the psychological reports, the emotional manipulation, the stolen funds from the joint account Ethan let you manage. Oh, and don't forget the folder I found in your drawer labeled Conservatorship Strategy. Shall I go on? Her mouth parted. Just slightly. That moment was worth every hour I had spent collecting truth like breadcrumbs in a dark forest. She took a step back. I'll see you in court, she spat. You already did, I said. And you lost. The door closed between us like the final page in a book that no one would reread. I locked it, not in fear, but in finality. Ethan arrived 20 minutes later, Jonah bouncing beside him in mismatched socks. He looked at me, eyes wide. She came here, didn't she? I nodded. Jonah ran inside to play. She said she'd try one more time, Ethan muttered, rubbing his jaw. Said she had nothing to lose. She has everything to lose, I said. And she knows it. He hesitated. I told her the custody hearing won't change anything, that the court already sees what she is. I placed a hand on his shoulder. That's not why she came. Then why to shake me, to remind me she still can. Did it work? I looked into my son's eyes. No, and I don't think it ever will again. The hearing was set 2 weeks later. It was uneventful. Rachel came armed with polished lies and performative sorrow. But the judge, an older woman with a stern voice and a steel gaze, saw through it. She read every file Carl submitted. She heard the audio. She noted that I had passed every cognitive test with full marks. She read Rachel's notes aloud in court. Eleanor will eventually slip. Just have to be patient. Use Jonah's confusion as leverage. He trusts me more than her. And when it was Rachel's turn to speak, her voice wavered. Not from grief, but from exposure. I sat silently beside Carl, watching her deflate. Her final request for any custody at all was denied. The judge's words were short, clear, and final. This court sees no evidence that the petitioner is acting in the best interest of the child. Temporary sole custody remains with the father. Supervised visits, if pursued, will require independent psychological evaluation of the petitioner. Rachel's lips were tight, but she didn't argue, because even she knew it was over. Outside the courthouse, I stood with Ethan and Carl. Rachel walked past us without a glance, her heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks at the end of a failed sentence. I turned to Carl. Thank you, I said. He nodded. You saved yourself long before I got involved. No, I said. I fought. But you helped me be heard. He smiled. That's all the law can do, Eleanor. Turn the volume up. When I returned home, I did something unexpected. I opened the box where I'd kept the evidence, the recordings, the transcripts, the photos, the notes from therapy. my quiet arsenal, and I began shredding them. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I no longer needed proof. The battle was over. The memory had been preserved. The witnesses had been named. I was not crazy. I was never unstable. I had been hunted, and I had survived. Jonah came downstairs as the shredder hummed. He watched quietly. "What's that?" he asked. "Old things," I replied. "Are they important?" "They were," I said. "But now I'm making room." For what? I looked at him and smiled. "For you." He grinned, climbed into my lap, and hugged me tight. "Grandma," he whispered. "Yes, my love. Can we plant more flowers?" "Yes," I said. "We can plant as many as you want." The garden is quiet today. A warm hush clings to the soil, the kind of calm that only exists after something has been pulled out by the roots. I kneel by the marigolds Jonah and I planted weeks ago, his careful little hands having pressed each seed into the earth like a secret. Now they bloom stubborn and bright, defying the heaviness of everything that came before them. I don't feel triumphant. I feel still. Sometimes survival isn't loud. It doesn't wave flags or shout victories. It just stands where something tried to bury it and says, "I'm still here." Jonah is behind me, playing with a stick and a line of ants. Ethan sits on the porch steps, coffee in hand, watching his son with an expression I recognize now. Not just love, but the weight of lessons learned too late. We don't talk much these days about Rachel. Her name has become a shadow we no longer chase, only acknowledge when necessary. She hasn't reached out since the court's decision, and part of me knows she won't, not because she's accepted defeat, but because she's found another story to star in, another stage to control. Some people don't change, they adapt. But I don't have to adapt to her anymore. She's no longer in the house, no longer in my routines, no longer in my head. And most importantly, she's no longer between me and Jonah. There are days when I still wake with doubt clinging to me, like sweat moments when I turn off the stove twice, or recheck the lock on the door and wonder what if they were right. But those moments pass quickly now, because I remember everything. I remember how she spoke to me, kindness wrapped around condescension. I remember the pills switched in the cabinet, the stories fed to Jonah, the erased photos, the smiling sabotage. And I remember how I refused to go quietly, even when no one believed me, even when my own son looked at me with the eyes of a stranger, even when they tried to turn my mind into a prison. I wrote everything down, not because I doubted myself, but because I knew that one day I might. That's what surviving abuse does. It teaches you to question even your certainty. It makes you flinch at your own instincts. But I documented, I recorded, I remembered. And in the end, that memory became my weapon, not against her, against silencing. A few weeks ago, I was walking Jonah home from school when he tugged on my hand and said, "Grandma, are bad people always gone forever?" "No," I said carefully, "but we don't have to let them stay." He nodded slowly, then asked, "Are you afraid she'll come back?" I looked down at him. His hair tousled his cheeks, sun-pink, the boy whose trust had once been a battleground. And I said the truth. I'm not afraid of her coming back. I'm afraid of forgetting what she did. Jonah tilted his head. "But you won't, right?" "No," I said. "I won't." And I meant it. Not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. Some stories aren't meant to be forgiven. Some scars aren't meant to be erased. Some memories deserve to stay, because they remind us who we are and what we survived. Ethan and I speak openly now. He still carries guilt like a quiet bruise, one that flares when he least expects it. "I saw it happening," he confessed one evening, "but I wanted peace, and peace felt easier than confrontation." "I understand," I told him. "Do you forgive me?" he asked. I paused, not out of cruelty, but honesty. "I'm learning to," I said. "Every day. Because forgiveness isn't a gift we hand out to make others comfortable. It's a door we open slowly for ourselves. He cried that night, the kind of tears men only shed when they realize how long they've been asleep inside their own life. I didn't comfort him. I witnessed him. And that was enough. Today I made a new shelf in the living room. A real one. With real things. Not curated, not aesthetic. Just mine. Old books. A chipped mug. A photo of my husband in his army jacket. One of Ethan and Jonah at the lake. A candle Jonah picked out for me at the school book fair, lavender and vanilla. And in the center a quote written in careful ink framed in gold. They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds. That's what Rachel never understood. You can erase photos. You can rearrange furniture. You can manipulate stories. But you can't destroy a woman who knows the weight of her own voice. She tried to turn me into the crazy old woman in the hallway. Instead, I became the historian of my own truth. To the women watching this, nodding quietly, remembering their own Rachel, I see you. I know what it's like to feel erased in your own home, to doubt your own memory because someone kept whispering that you were broken, to feel like you're disappearing in plain sight. You're not. You are not crazy. You are not unstable. You are not the problem. And if no one else tells you this today, let me. You are still here. And that's everything. Now tell your story. Write it, speak it, share it. Because your memory isn't just yours. It's your armor. It's your seed. And it will grow. So that's what happened. That's how I reclaim my life from the people who smiled while pulling it apart. If this story reminded you of someone, yourself, a friend, a mother, please share it. Let someone else know they're not alone. And if you have a story of your own, drop it in the comments. We listen here. We believe here. This is Grace's Truth, and I hope it helped you find a piece of yours.